"Is she still alive?" David shouted, his voice cracking in the midst of the dizziness. Maya, his only daughter, had been shot just because of the color of her skin. A routine traffic stop had turned into a homicide due to prejudice. David Carter didn't beg for mercy, he wanted justice. The police system had rotted and he would tear it down. But when the truth was shielded by power and lies, would a father be ruthless enough to uncover everything? "Which state do you live in? I want to know where my story can go from here." Maya sat in her car, hands gently steering the wheel, eyes focused on the long road ahead. After a long day at work, all she could think about was getting home, changing into something comfortable, having dinner, and chatting with her parents. Simple plans, yet in her mind, they were all that mattered at this moment. Tonight, Maya felt a sense of relief, nothing special, just peaceful moments she had longed for. As Maya's car continued along the empty road, suddenly a police car's siren blared and stopped right in front of her. Maya was startled, slowing down and coming to a halt, her eyes scanning for any signals from the officers approaching her. Not understanding why she had been stopped, she rolled down the window and waited. Officer Mark Riley walked up, his face emotionless, while Ben Taylor stood by, hand ready on his side. "Show me your papers," Riley demanded, his voice cold, without any explanation for the stop. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She opened her wallet and handed him her driver's license and other documents, but as soon as she did, Riley made no move to return them. Instead, he turned to ask irrelevant questions. "In a hurry?" he asked, eyeing her suspiciously. Maya, still calm, tried to explain, "No, I just finished work. I don't understand why I was stopped." Riley did not respond, only repeating his demand, his tone growing ruder. Taylor, standing nearby, cast a judgmental gaze. Each question made Maya feel as though she was being judged, not for anything she had done wrong, but because of her skin color. There was an open disdain, unmasked. Maya felt uncomfortable, but she still tried to stay calm. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just driving home. If there's a problem, I'm ready to cooperate." Immediately, Riley turned back, a sudden and threatening gesture. He drew his gun, aimed it at Maya, and the situation escalated quickly. Maya couldn't believe her eyes. A police officer was doing this for no apparent reason. She tried to keep calm, gripping the steering wheel tightly, unsure of what to do. "I don't have a weapon. I haven't done anything wrong," she said, eyes fixed on the gun. But Riley wasn't listening. Instead, he continued to assert his power, showing no mercy. Ben Taylor, standing behind, kept yelling, not giving Maya a chance to respond. She felt like she was being cornered, with no fairness. In a moment of intense tension, the gunshot rang out. Maya felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if a surge of hot electricity shot through her body. She saw blood, felt the pain spread through every part of her, and then everything became a blur. The surroundings around her began to fade. She slumped down, her head spinning, not understanding what was happening. The sound of an ambulance siren echoed from a distance, but Maya no longer had the strength to see or feel anything. All she could hear was the noise of people around her, questions, and the chaos in the air. But in the meantime, Riley and Taylor stood still, unmoving, as if they were not the ones responsible for this brutality. They just looked at each other, their faces expressionless, maintaining the cold demeanor of those who never have to face consequences. David walked into the kitchen, a regular evening like any other. He poured himself a warm glass of water, opened a book, and relaxed after a long day at work. In the quiet space, the clink of utensils rang out as he prepared dinner, thinking about what he would do after eating. Everything was in its place, nothing special, life passing by peacefully. He smiled as he remembered the conversation with Maya that morning when she promised they would have dinner together after a tough week at work. Moments like these for David were everything. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. He didn't think much of it and answered the call without checking the caller ID. But when the doctor's voice came through the line, everything inside him suddenly shifted. "Mr. Carter, I'm the doctor in the emergency room. Your daughter, Maya, was shot during a traffic stop. Her condition is very critical. We need you here immediately." David seemed to hear nothing but the pounding of his heart in his chest. The doctor's words faded into the background, as if everything around him had sunk into a fog. He gripped the phone tightly, his hand shaking, a numbness taking over his body. Maya, his daughter, was the victim? He couldn't believe it. Every sweet memory of his young daughter, living a peaceful and happy life, was now abruptly shattered. Each word from the doctor felt like a blow to his head. Shot? Why her? David tried to shake off the dizziness. "Is she still alive?" he interrupted, unable to bear any more painful details. "Is she still alive?" His voice was starting to waver. "We are doing everything we can, but her condition is very critical," the doctor replied, his voice filled with urgency. David's heart felt like it was being squeezed. Every thought, every image in his head was instantly erased. He threw the phone down onto the table, rushed out of the house without changing his clothes. In his mind, there was only one thought: his daughter was in danger. The car sped through the empty streets. David pressed the accelerator, but each stretch of road seemed endless. He could barely breathe, his heart racing faster, and fear overwhelmed him. All the memories of peaceful days with his family flashed clearly in his mind. He remembered those dinner times at the table, Maya's laughter, the warmth of family. But now, everything felt distant, replaced only by overwhelming anxiety. Would Maya survive? Would she pull through? David couldn't stop imagining what Maya was going through. He didn't know where she was, what condition she was in, but one thing was clear. There was nothing he could do except drive as fast as possible. Every turn, every stretch of road felt endless. The fear weighed heavily on him, and he just wanted to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. When David finally arrived at the hospital, he rushed inside, his eyes full of confusion and exhaustion. Doctors and nurses hurried back and forth, but no one paid attention to him. He ran after them, his voice hoarse with worry. "Where is Maya?" he shouted, unable to hold back his emotions. A nurse pointed toward the emergency room. David didn't say another word, just ran straight to it. Entering the room, he saw his daughter lying motionless on the hospital bed. The large wound on Maya's body made him choke up. She lay there, her face pale, surrounded by medical equipment. David's mind spun, his heart breaking. He couldn't bear this sight. His strong, hopeful daughter was now lying there in this condition. He took Maya's hand, feeling her warmth, but it couldn't erase the pain in his heart. "Maya, you have to live. You have to live," he muttered, his eyes filled with tears. Although he knew the situation was critical, in that moment, David promised his daughter that he would do everything he could to pull her out of this situation so that justice could be served. David sat alone in his office, the faint light from the desk lamp casting over the pile of papers scattered in front of him. Reports, documents, and notes were strewn across the desk, all serving a common purpose: to uncover the truth about Maya's case. His mind was tense, as if stretched to its limit, and every bit of information seemed to be tangled in his thoughts. But David couldn't stop. He looked at the words on the paper, each sentence and word like a knife cutting deep into his mind. Every new detail only made him more resolute. He was getting closer to the answer, even though he couldn't see the whole picture yet. In recent days, the pain and anger inside him had grown stronger, but it couldn't make him falter. David didn't want this case to be forgotten, nor did he want innocent officers to continue committing wrongful acts without accountability. He knew that if he didn't act now, it could just be another overlooked accident, a story lost in the apathy of the system, and he wouldn't allow that to happen. His mind seemed to scream at him, pushing him further in this search. He started to lay out the next steps, searching for the remaining clues. David couldn't do it all by himself, so he decided to seek help from those he knew would understand and empathize with him. At the same time, the names involved in the case began to surface, each name bringing with it a string of problems to solve. From untapped witnesses to unexamined physical evidence, everything was a crucial piece David needed to collect. He also began to sense that he wasn't just dealing with a simple shooting, but with a much larger network, a system of discrimination hidden in the shadows. To uncover the truth, David couldn't act alone. He immediately thought of Aaron Wells. his longtime friend and a prosecutor with extensive legal experience. They had worked together on previous cases and knew each other inside out. David called Aaron and immediately received an agreement for help. The call was short but full of worry. "Can you help me?" David's voice cracked, clearly showing the helplessness in his eyes as he remembered Maya in the hospital. Aaron didn't hesitate, ready to help, even though he knew this would put both of them in dangerous situations. Together with Aaron, David began to make plans. They divided the work, from gathering the overlooked evidence to finding the witnesses who could speak out. Those who had witnessed the incident, those who knew the truth but had never dared to speak up, would all be sought after. David no longer felt fear. He had only one goal now: to protect Maya and expose the truth. The worries about safety gradually faded as his determination grew stronger. Days passed, but David didn't falter. He knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but he also understood that if he did nothing, he couldn't live with himself. Finally, after a long day of work, David stood in front of the mirror in his office, looking into his own eyes. He realized he was ready for what was to come. Everything was clear. "I won't stop until the truth is revealed," he told himself. What he saw in the mirror wasn't just the image of a father, but that of a warrior, a man determined to face every hardship, relentlessly moving toward his ultimate goal. David walked out of the office, no longer feeling fear, only determination. He was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. David entered the cafe, the quiet atmosphere, the dim light casting down onto the old wooden tables, creating a private ambiance perfect for this important conversation. He noticed Aaron sitting at the corner of the room, his longtime friend's face filled with worry but also unwavering resolve. When their eyes met, David didn't need to say a word. Aaron understood everything. With just a glance, he recognized the pain in David's heart and the determination that couldn't be shaken. David sat down across from him, his breath still not back to normal after hurriedly leaving the office. He began to recount the details of what he had uncovered about the case, step by step. Every piece of information, every detail about the injustice his daughter had endured, made his heart tighten. "Maya wasn't the only one treated like this," he said, his voice choked. "But we can't let this continue." Aaron listened intently, his expression unchanged. Though he had worked in the legal system, Aaron never imagined that the cruelty of the police could be so great. Officers like Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, who not only abused their power but also deliberately manipulated the system, were far too ruthless. "We can't let them continue like this," Aaron spoke up, his eyes full of seriousness. "They may be people who never face punishment, but if we don't do something, they will keep committing these crimes. This injustice can't continue." Aaron's voice was full of resolve. He understood that they were up against a difficult battle. The people behind this case were powerful, but that wasn't a reason to give up. David nodded, the determination in him gradually returning. "We won't stop," he said, clenching his fist. "Not just for Maya, but for others too. We'll do whatever it takes to bring justice." The conversation shifted to the action plans. The two began making detailed plans to confront this system. They knew that in order to win, they had to be extremely careful and have a clear strategy. David suggested contacting the witnesses who could help, those who had been silenced by the system in the past. They also needed to prepare solid legal files, gather more evidence from independent sources not influenced by the police. "We need to have a clear plan, step by step," David asserted. "We can't take too many risks right from the start. We have to know what we're doing." He didn't want to act on impulse. Everything had to be calculated. This story was too important, and he wouldn't do anything to make things worse. Aaron looked at his friend, the commitment in his eyes undeniable. "I won't leave you alone in this fight," Aaron said, his voice firm. "We'll do everything to ensure justice is served, no matter who we face. Don't worry, I'll be by your side." These words made David feel more confident. He knew that he wasn't alone in this battle. By the end of the evening, as they both stood up to leave, the atmosphere in the cafe was still quiet, the light dimmed, reflecting on the shadows of the two men. Neither needed to say anything more. A simple look was enough to understand. Their goal was now clear. Justice had to be served. The truth had to be revealed, no matter what dark forces were behind it. The battle had begun, and David knew that no matter how difficult and dangerous the road ahead was, he would never give up. David sat at his desk, the dim light of the desk lamp casting a faint glow on the piles of papers. Each document, each report, was a piece of the puzzle in the case he was pursuing. He flipped through the papers, leaning in to read the notes and records related to Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, the two officers directly involved in the shooting of Maya. According to the report, they always acted within the scope of their duties, but what David found in these notes was something entirely different. The words seemed harmless, yet they felt like cuts in his mind, gradually revealing a bigger picture of the truth he needed to uncover. Each new piece of evidence David collected only strengthened his resolve. He realized that the shooting of Maya wasn't just a random incident. With every step he took, every file he opened, he came to realize that something bigger was happening behind the scenes. He began reviewing previous cases involving Riley and Taylor, tracing the tracks of misconduct in their reports. These actions had not been taken seriously. Many cases were overlooked or suppressed in unusual ways. David continued revisiting past traffic stops, especially those in predominantly black neighborhoods. These stops all had something in common. They weren't random checks, but seemed to have been planned in advance. These incidents not only reflected racial discrimination, but also suggested a deliberate conspiracy carried out by those in power. As he kept searching, David began to sense the cover-up surrounding the case. He looked into officials in the Atlanta Police Department and uncovered a strong protection network for these officers. Higher-ups seemed to consistently shield Riley and Taylor, not just in Maya's case, but in others as well. A covert relationship had been established between the officers and powerful figures in society, from real estate developers to landowners, all of whom seemed to have a shared interest in maintaining silence and perpetuating injustice. David started to realize that these actions were not merely about racial discrimination, but also organized corruption, with bigger schemes behind these incidents that he now had to confront. A surprising meeting occurred when David ran into a former cop at a cafe. The man had left the force because he couldn't stand the corruption within the system. Though he couldn't testify officially for fear of retaliation, he handed David some important information. What the ex-cop revealed only made David more determined. The man warned that the investigation was not only dangerous for him, but for his loved ones as well. Yet, this warning did not intimidate David. It only made him more resolute. "I will not stop," David thought to himself. "No matter what I face, I will see this through." As night fell, David returned to his office, the light from his desk lamp illuminating the stack of documents. He sat quietly, looking at each page, each piece of information he had gathered. He knew he was up against a powerful and dangerous system, but it was his love for Maya and his determination to protect her that kept him moving forward. Each new piece of evidence felt like a flame burning inside him, driving him to continue the journey toward the truth. Every paper, every detail, no matter how small, made him more steadfast. David couldn't turn back. He had to move forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The hospital seemed to be shrouded in a quiet stillness, broken only by the sounds of nurses walking by, the hum of machines, and the faint noises filled with anxiety. Maya lay in her hospital bed, her wounds severe, but she remained conscious. Though her body was weak, having lost a lot of blood, her spirit was unshaken. The pain from the injuries spread through her body, but her will to live was strong, refusing to let her give up. Maya opened her eyes, barely able to see her father's face standing by her bedside. David looked at her with worry and exhaustion, but he didn't allow himself to falter. Maya could feel the love and resilience in his gaze, and even though her body ached, her mind stayed steady. She didn't want her father to worry too much, didn't want him to endure any more pain. The doctors said that Maya was still not completely out of danger. The wound was serious and the blood loss had drained her energy. But she wouldn't allow herself to be weak. refusing to let fear take over. Maya tried to reassure her father. "Don't worry, Dad. I won't give up." Her voice was weak, yet filled with resolve. Those words were like a spark in David's heart, giving him strength and motivation, as if they were a promise, not just to him, but to her. Maya knew nothing was certain, but she would not give up, not allow fate to crush her. David sat beside her bed, holding her hand, saying nothing, just quietly being there, feeling each weak breath from his daughter. He couldn't do anything more than be by her side, but in his heart, his determination to protect her was stronger than ever. He looked into her tired eyes, while plans to uncover the truth about what had happened to her became clearer in his mind. The sense of helplessness inside him was replaced with an invisible strength. He had to continue the fight, not just for Maya, but for justice itself. "You can go on, Dad. You can't stop now," Maya said, struggling but trying to smile. David looked into his daughter's eyes, and tears began to fall. His love for Maya was the greatest force that kept him going through all the hardship, all the challenges. He hugged her tightly, speaking through his choked breath. "I will do everything, my love. I will bring justice for you." Maya was not just his daughter, she was the reason he continued to fight, the powerful inspiration that kept him from ever giving up. For David, justice was not an abstract concept. It was the life of his daughter. It was the belief in the values he had always followed. Every encouraging word from Maya made him more determined, and nothing could stop him when love and justice were the driving forces in his life. As night fell, David stepped out of the hospital room. He felt a new strength in his body, a strength he hadn't recognized before. Maya had not given up, and neither would he. The feeling of a father's steadfastness in protecting his daughter gave him the power to keep moving forward. Though he knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges and dangers, David was not afraid. He would continue this fight to protect the most precious thing in his life. The final image was of David standing silently in the hospital hallway, the dim light from the lamps shining on his face, filled with determination, ready to face any challenge until the truth was revealed. David sat silently by Maya's hospital bed, the soft glow from the night lamp casting a dim light over his face. Maya lay motionless, the steady beep of the ventilator filling the room with medical devices connected to her body. Everything in the room was still, as if time itself had paused. David said nothing. There was no need to speak. His presence spoke volumes. He did not need to express his feelings in words, for just a glance was enough. In this moment, all that remained was the deep, unconditional love David had for his daughter. He did not need to try to show it. His gaze and actions were sufficient for Maya to feel her father's love. David gently placed his hand on Maya's hand, holding it with tenderness yet determination. He did not express his emotions loudly, but that simple gesture of holding her hand was enough to convey his concern, his care, and his desire to protect her. He was a strong father, having faced many trials in life, but before his daughter, he was simply a loving and nurturing father. His love for Maya was so strong that he could not leave her, not even for a second. David did not express his feelings with flowery words, but through his actions, those around him could feel his worry. He kept Maya's room clean and tidy, picked up each towel, and refilled her water when necessary. Every time a doctor came to check on Maya's condition, David stood close, his eyes never leaving his daughter. He asked questions about her health, even though he knew not all the answers would be positive. But no matter what, he did not leave, did not walk away, but continued to sit by her side, holding her hand as if that was the only place he needed to be. One night, when everything around him fell into silence, only the sound of the ventilator echoed in the room, David sat, facing Maya. The light from the night lamp illuminated a part of his face, highlighting the wrinkles and signs of exhaustion. He looked at his daughter's still face, her sad eyes, and memories began flooding back. He recalled the times when Maya was little, when she would ask him about the world, about life, with questions full of curiosity and innocence. David would explain to her how to live, about love and sincerity. During those times, Maya always trusted his words, and now it was he who had to trust that Maya would fight to wake up. Each memory that surfaced made David's heart tighten, as if each moment were an unhealed wound. David did not cry, even though his emotions were overwhelming. The tears could not fall, but deep inside, the pain was undeniable. He could not understand why life had to be so unfair, why his daughter had to endure such pain. But one thing was certain, he would never give up. Every moment spent looking at Maya lying motionless in her hospital bed only strengthened his resolve. "You're not alone," David whispered, almost unable to hear his own words. But he believed Maya would hear them. No matter her condition, Maya would feel his love, feel that her father was always there for her, always the first to stand against any adversity. This love, profound and strong, would drive David to continue fighting, not just for justice, but for his beloved daughter. David entered the enclosed room, the light in the room illuminating his face. Tired but determined, he placed the documents on the table, each sheet containing important information he had gathered over time. However, it still wasn't enough. He knew that alone he couldn't uncover the dark secrets, so he needed help from someone he trusted completely. Aaron was the only one David could rely on in this battle. Aaron sat across from him, looking into David's eyes. He could see the determination in his friend's gaze, but he also could not ignore the pain and fatigue within it. "You need me, I'll help," Aaron said, his voice firm. Though he didn't want to get too deeply involved in this fight, his understanding of the situation and their long friendship made it impossible for him to stand aside. David did not need any further explanation. That simple phrase was all he needed to hear. They began to plan the investigation in more detail. Aaron used his industry connections to access important sources of information without being detected. To do this, they had to be extremely careful, avoiding surveillance and interference from those within the police system. They searched for overlooked documents, undisclosed reports, and witnesses willing to testify about what had happened. Aaron reached out to other police officers, those who had witnessed or knew about the corruption within the department. Former officers, those who had left the force because they couldn't stand the corruption, became valuable sources of information. Every piece of information, every clue they gathered, reinforced the fact that corruption was not a personal issue, but had permeated every level of the Atlanta Police Department. This system was not just a few bad apples, but a vast network with protection from those at the top. Even with a clear plan, gathering information was no easy task. Each time they approached a new source, David could feel the danger lurking closer. People within the police system were beginning to take notice of his actions. Senior officials also began to suspect and find ways to stop the investigation. David understood that he was up against an incredibly powerful force, and they would not stop until he was removed. Aaron, with his experience, shared his concerns about the fight. "They're not just cops," Aaron said, his voice serious. "There are also tycoons and politicians behind them. These people have power, and they won't stop trying to block us." Despite this, Aaron still believed that justice had to be served. "We might be scared, but we have to act, because if we don't, there will be no justice." Finally, both sat looking at the documents they had collected. The evidence was slowly coming to light, and David could feel a change within him. He knew that this fight was not only for Maya, but also a fight against a corrupt system that had infiltrated the government. He could not let it continue, no matter the cost. The final scene was the light from the desk lamps, casting a glow on the determined faces of David and Aaron. The light reflected their unwavering resolve. They were not just standing up for justice, but were warriors in a battle they knew would not be easy, but it was the only path they could take. David continued to immerse himself in the pile of documents he had gathered. The light from his desk lamp cast a faint glow over reports, minutes, and notes, creating a tense and gloomy atmosphere in his office. Each page, each line seemed to carry a piece of the truth he had to uncover. The cases involving Officers Riley and Taylor gradually revealed a clearer picture of misconduct within the Atlanta Police Department. The traffic stops involving black individuals were not random. They were part of a deliberate strategy. Maya was just one of many victims of a cleverly concealed system of racial discrimination. As he flipped through each file, David came across reports of previous traffic stops. Tracing the pattern of each incident, he noticed a clear trend. Most of the victims were black, and the behavior of the officers went beyond merely checking documents. It involved threats and even abuse of power. The actions of these officers were not just personal mistakes, they were part of a larger strategy, a system in which those involved were protected. Officers like Riley and Taylor were not just law enforcement officers. They were links in a network that shielded misconduct within the police. As David dug deeper into the reports, he began to notice a strong protective stance from the higher-ups within the police department. Incidents involving officer misconduct were routinely marked as no basis or insufficient evidence, despite the clear evidence David had at hand. This pointed to a protective system, an underground network between officers and high-ranking officials within the department. These relationships created a solid shield that protected wrongful actions from being exposed. The truth behind Maya's case, therefore, was not just an injustice against one individual. It was a small part of a larger picture of organized racial discrimination. David continued to follow the trail, and what he uncovered only strengthened his resolve. The files he found began to reveal a shady connection between the police department and real estate developers. The areas where the most traffic stops occurred were predominantly black neighborhoods, and now they were targeted for redeveloped urban development projects, which were promoted as economic progress, had a different purpose: to remove unsuitable residents and clear land for large real estate developments. Police officers were not just carrying out random traffic stops. They were part of a deliberate campaign to create vacant lots for investors to easily purchase. Each new piece of evidence David gathered further clarified the connection between the police and real estate developers. These traffic stops were not just for document checks. They were a calculated strategy to force black residents to move out of the valuable land they occupied. The struggles of families fighting to regain their homes were not just personal stories, they were battles against a powerful and brutal system. As night fell, David remained seated at his desk, the dim lights illuminating the words on the paper. A sense of unease spread within him as he realized that this battle was not only about protecting Maya, it was a fight against a system deeply entrenched in society. This system, from police officers to real estate developers, had formed a corrupt network where racial discrimination and abuse of power were not just personal actions, but an organized strategy. David was no longer just a father protecting his daughter. He had become a fighter for a greater ideal, a fight to bring justice to all those marginalized by this system. David continued to delve deeper into the complex web of financial ties he uncovered between Atlanta police officials and real estate developers. What he found only fueled his determination further. The redevelopment projects in which police officers were involved were not just ordinary urban development projects. They were part of a sophisticated corruption strategy. Real estate developers were not only trying to buy land from former property owners, but they were also exploiting the power of the police to carry out dirty plans to remove unsuitable residents, particularly low-income black individuals. The areas targeted by these projects were predominantly black neighborhoods. David realized that the residents living there were facing the threat of losing the land and homes they had been attached to for years. Each traffic stop, each check, was not simply about traffic control or security. It was part of a larger strategy to push residents out of valuable land to make way for urban development projects, enabling wealthy developers to make enormous profits. This realization filled David with deep sorrow, as innocent people, including Maya, were becoming victims of a ruthless land grab. As he continued his investigation, David found a series of financial documents and transaction reports, revealing large sums of money being transferred from real estate companies into the accounts of high-ranking police officials. These transactions were not transparent, and each contract showed signs of forgery, designed to conceal the kickbacks paid to police officers and powerful officials. The files David discovered shed light on this extensive relationship, with the money being shared among officers like Riley and Taylor, and even high-level leaders within the police department. This revealed that the corruption was not limited to individual officers. The entire system was manipulating power to serve personal interests. David also realized that the areas where the most frequent traffic stops occurred were where developers were planning to buy land. Black residents in these areas were often stopped for vague reasons and threatened with eviction, even though they had not broken any laws. This was not just ordinary racial discrimination, it was a calculated strategy to cleanse the neighborhood by removing residents who lacked the financial means to fight back. These real estate developers were not just buying land, they were clearing the way by creating threats for the residents, forcing them to leave. David's unease grew with each new piece of evidence. Every new connection he uncovered made him realize that this battle was not just against corrupt officers. It was a confrontation with a vast system of power, including high-ranking officials and those behind real estate projects. This system not only manipulated the police, but also controlled land distribution, where poor and racially discriminated people became victims of a larger plan with the goal of creating a society with no room for them. David no longer had any doubt about the need to act. He knew that to expose the truth he had to face forces far stronger than he had ever imagined, but with every new discovery his determination grew stronger. He could not allow this corruption to continue. He could not let people like Maya suffer again. Each new piece of evidence, despite being difficult and dangerous to uncover, was a significant step forward in this journey. David knew this battle would not be easy, but he could not give up. Each piece of the larger puzzle made him even more determined to expose the truth and bring justice to his daughter. With Almighty, David stood in front of the mirror, staring at his own reflection. The dim light from the desk lamp illuminated his face, revealing the evident tension. He had prepared meticulously for this meeting, but he could not shake off the feeling of unease. Meeting Mark Riley and Ben Taylor this time was different from before. This was his first opportunity to confront the men responsible for the cruelty toward his daughter. If he wasn't careful, this meeting could expose his intentions, but his determination was strong, and he couldn't back down. He needed to know the truth, and to do so, he could no longer maintain distance from these men. The quiet atmosphere of the cafe seemed to calm everything around him as David walked in. There were only a few customers chatting in the corner, but his eyes immediately sought out the two men sitting near the window. Riley and Taylor, seemingly waiting for him, sat across from each other, their faces neutral, yet an unmistakable tension hung in the air. They glanced at their watches, their hands casually brushing the coffee cups, neither speaking as David sat down. "Hello, gentlemen," David greeted, starting the conversation with caution. The initial pleasantries maintained a calm demeanor, but the tension between Riley and Taylor was clearly palpable. After a few formal exchanges, the air grew thick with unease. Despite knowing he lacked sufficient evidence, David decided to ask the first question about the incident. "I'd like to know about the recent traffic stops you've made, especially with Maya." Both officers froze. Their demeanor changed instantly, despite their efforts to remain composed. Riley, with a face that showed no change, vaguely replied, "We're just doing our job as usual," but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. David didn't relent, continuing to revisit the reports and pointing out the obvious contradictions. "The reason why Maya was stopped still isn't clear. Can you explain?" Riley didn't respond immediately, but cast a furtive glance at Taylor, as if seeking support. Taylor nodded slightly, and then both of them adopted a more defensive posture. They began to deflect David's questions, each explanation becoming more awkward. David sensed the shift in their responses. Their evasion became more apparent. However, he persisted, pushing them into a corner. David's sharp questions left them with little room for further excuses, each response only causing them to become more uncomfortable. The conversation gradually morphed into a tense standoff as David lost patience with their vague explanations. David could feel it. Riley and Taylor were hiding something. The exchange of glances between them revealed cracks in their cover-up. David's hands clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. The anger rising within him was intense, yet he knew one wrong move could ruin everything. but the change in their demeanor made him confident that he was on the right track. Finally, when he couldn't get an official answer from the two officers, David stood up, deciding to end the meeting. He left the cafe, a sense of worry gnawing at him. Though the conversation hadn't yielded clear results, David knew he had disrupted their plans significantly. The feeling of helplessness and anger welled up inside him, but he couldn't stop. This was just the beginning, and David understood that the road ahead would not be easy, but he couldn't give up. The instinct of a father wanting to protect his daughter gave him the strength to keep moving forward, no matter the challenges ahead. After the tense encounter with Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, David couldn't stop thinking about what had just transpired. Although the two officers hadn't admitted to anything, he could clearly sense the concealment in their behavior. A feeling of unease crept up within David. He knew he didn't have enough evidence to confront them directly, but one thing was certain: they were hiding something. Everything inside him seemed to burn, and he realized that he needed to find another way, some loophole to break through the wall that Riley and Taylor had built. He couldn't let this slip by. David was determined not to give up. He couldn't stop now, with the truth still ahead. Although he had failed to gather direct information from the two officers, the fire in his veins pushed him forward. The cost of continuing the investigation no longer mattered. His goal was clear: to protect Maya and uncover the truth. Returning to work with Aaron, his trusted companion, David continued searching for the missing pieces. They began investigating other traffic stops that Riley and Taylor had conducted. Seemingly insignificant details could prove to be important clues. They sat together for hours, reviewing each file and report, leaving no detail unchecked. Finally, a tip from a former police officer surfaced, providing David with crucial information. This lead revealed a detail David had never considered before: the phone calls that Riley and Taylor had made before and after the incident with Maya. These calls could be the key to unlocking the mystery behind the case, and immediately David realized that this story was not just about Maya. It was much bigger, possibly involving a conspiracy that had been carefully concealed. Though this new lead sparked hope within David, he was fully aware that the road ahead would not be easy. Gaining access to critical documents, especially the phone records and other blocked materials, would not be straightforward. Every step he took would face major barriers from the authorities and from those who were trying to cover up the truth. David knew he was up against a vast network of power, and every move he made was being closely monitored. Once again, David had to turn to potential witnesses who might provide more information, but during this process he also had to face threats from those involved. The names remained hidden in the shadows, protecting the injustice. David couldn't let fear take over. He knew these people wouldn't let him easily access the truth, but he had become too determined to back down. Every step he took carried danger, but David wouldn't let it stop him. As night fell, David returned to his office. He sat down, the desk lamp casting a light on his face where determination and thought burned strong. He immersed himself in the pile of documents and evidence he had just gathered. Though there were no clear results yet, David felt that he had made significant progress. He couldn't stop now. The resilience inside him grew stronger, and nothing could stand in his way. "I won't stop," he whispered to himself, his fists clenched. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect Maya, and to ensure these people can't escape justice." The final image was of David, resolute and never giving up, even though the path ahead was filled with obstacles and dangers. David sat in his office, the light from his desk lamp casting shadows over piles of documents related to Maya's case. He had spent countless hours studying, flipping through each report, statement, and witness note. Every small piece of information could bring him closer to the truth. Over the past few days, he had worked tirelessly to collect evidence, reach out to those who might hold crucial information, and begin to build a detailed file on the case. Every step he took was directed toward a single goal: finding those responsible for this brutal act. Although the situation was gradually reaching its conclusion, a sudden phone call shattered the silence in the room. David didn't think much of it at first, but when he realized the unfamiliar number, an unsettling feeling washed over him. He picked up the phone and waited. The voice on the other end was cold, emotionless. "Don't think you can get away with this," the caller said, their tone low and threatening. "The police can protect you, but you can't protect your loved ones. Stop now, or you'll regret it." David could feel the weight of each word. The threat wasn't just aimed at him, it was directed at the people he cared about. This wasn't a simple warning. It was a sign that the person behind this had significant power, capable of hurting those around him. A chill spread through his body. This wasn't an empty phone call. These people weren't just threatening him, they were trying to force him into a corner. After the call, a sense of unease enveloped David. He wasn't just worried about himself, but also about those close to him. The friends who were helping him with the investigation. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave his mind. Every time he left the house, he felt like someone was silently observing him. He began to notice an unfamiliar car tailing him when he went out, the distance between the car and him remaining unchanged. Each time he looked back, the car was still there, a clear sign that someone was closely following his every move. The danger didn't just come from the phone threat, but also from the constant surveillance. He felt like he was being trapped, with every move under scrutiny. But in that moment, he understood that the closer he got to the truth, the more obstacles he would face. Despite this, fear would not make him retreat. He knew he couldn't stop. Maya and those affected by this corrupt system deserved to know the truth. There is no turning back, David thought. Maya and the truth are worth fighting for. The feeling of anxiety and fear mixed within him. But it wasn't something that would stop him. David was firmer than ever. He would not allow fear to control him, nor would he let these threats dictate his actions. Those behind this thought that they could make him hesitate, but David understood that he was on the right path. The truth couldn't be hidden forever. The call ended and David hung up the phone, sitting back in his office. He looked at the documents before him, more determined than ever. The threats from the other side couldn't make him back down. Each day he grew closer to the truth, and each piece of evidence he gathered was a weapon to expose those behind it. Although the path ahead was filled with dangers, he would not give up. For Maya, for justice, David would continue the fight, no matter what. One evening, after receiving the threat over the phone, David couldn't let fear control him. He knew that the closer he got to the truth, the more dangers would appear. But he also understood that if he stepped back now, nothing would ever change. David stepped outside, determined to continue the investigation, unwilling to let anything stop him. But as he drove through the empty streets, the sense of unease crept back into his mind. Someone was following him, not just through the strange car, but also through the fleeting shadows in the dark. This feeling made David restless. The car following him grew closer, the darkness enveloping the streets, with no one in sight. The sense of danger surged through his body immediately, with each turn he took on the road seemingly intensifying the tension within him. David couldn't shake this strange feeling. He began to sense that this wasn't a coincidence. Every time he looked back, the car was still there, like a shadow that couldn't be erased. The atmosphere felt heavier, making him feel as if he was being cornered. When he reached a deserted intersection, the car sped up behind him and suddenly blocked his path. David quickly realized that this situation wasn't random. A group of people stepped out of the car, dressed in black, their faces obscured, showing no intention of negotiating or explaining. They rushed toward him, their eyes cold, not a word of warning. David had no choice but to assess the situation quickly. He knew that confronting them now would make things even more dangerous, and it might not just be a threat, it could be an actual attack. Although experienced in combat, David knew he couldn't take on a group of trained individuals with a clear purpose. He had to find a way to escape without leaving a trace, especially since these people clearly weren't just here to intimidate. With the calm he needed, David made a decision. He opened the car door and rushed into a nearby dark alley. They didn't give up. They continued chasing him, but David had created enough of a distance. His steps were quick and strong, not daring to stop. He could hear the footsteps of his pursuers behind him, but the determination inside him wouldn't allow him to look back. At this moment, David had only one thought: protect himself and continue the investigation. These people could threaten him, could make him afraid, but he couldn't let fear take over. There is only one way, he told himself. Keep going. Every step he took wasn't just to escape the danger, but also to move firmly toward the truth, toward the justice he was pursuing. When he had temporarily escaped from the group, David felt the tension in his body. Though he was safe for now, he knew the danger was still present. The people behind this wouldn't stop here, but a new feeling rose within him. He realized that each step toward the truth, no matter how dangerous, brought him closer to his ultimate goal. There was no turning back now. Justice must be served. David returned with a renewed determination. His life might be in danger, but he couldn't quit. The challenges ahead were unavoidable, but with every step, he grew more resolute. The fight wasn't just for him, but for all those who had been pushed into the darkness. The final image was of David standing in the dark, but no longer afraid. He moved toward the light, where the truth and justice awaited. David and Aaron sat across from each other in a small, dimly lit room. The light illuminated only the important documents they had just gathered. Although the room was small, it contained pieces of evidence that could change their lives. A former police officer, now ready to share confidential information, had reached out to them for a private meeting. These details were not rumors or unverified stories, but solid evidence of illicit actions taking place within the system. As the light flickered on, the documents began to reveal parts of the truth. What they discovered left both men in disbelief. A well-organized campaign was underway to seize assets from high-income black neighborhoods. The traffic stops, which they had once thought were mere random incidents, were actually part of a larger, meticulously planned strategy to financially ruin residents, forcing them to surrender their property. Each stop was a deliberate action, designed to collect fines and later exploit the situation to seize assets. These documents were not just simple reports. Alongside them, they found recordings of phone calls, secret meetings, and direct instructions from high-ranking officials within the police department. As they read through each line, David and Aaron gradually realized that the police officers, instead of merely enforcing justice, were being coerced into carrying out illegal tasks that served the interests of the powerful figures behind the scenes. The details became clearer and clearer, but they also heightened the anxiety in their hearts. This corruption was not merely the wrongdoing of a few individuals, it was a vast network involving powerful people. Officials within the police department had set quotas that officers were required to meet, regardless of the legality of their actions. These quotas, it became clear that the goal was not just to control these areas, but to seize the assets of those who could not fight back. Aaron, with his extensive experience as a prosecutor, pointed out the sophistication of the operation. This isn't just corruption for money, he observed. They want to control these areas, seize the property of people who can't defend themselves. They aren't just taking their belongings, they're taking away their chance at a decent life. Aaron's words made David's anxiety swell. Every next step would not only be a fight for justice for Maya, but also a battle against a system that was too powerful and complex to defeat easily. They both looked at the documents on the table, feeling the tension in the air. They knew they'd come closer than ever to the truth, but at the same time, they were acutely aware that every step from now on would be a confrontation with powerful forces, the people behind all of this. These were the people who could easily shut down such investigations, who would do anything to protect their interests. David and Aaron knew they had to be more cautious than ever before. They couldn't afford any mistakes, for even one misstep could cost them everything. The danger was drawing closer, but they couldn't stop. This fight had become a part of their lives, and no matter how painful the outcome might be, they knew that the truth had to be exposed. After gathering enough evidence, David and Aaron realized that the asset seizure campaign was not just an accidental occurrence, but a large-scale, organized strategy. The traffic stops, which they had once considered coincidences, were revealed to be parts of a bigger plan designed to push people into debt and take their property. These high-income black neighborhoods, once seen as homes to ordinary families, had become the targets of this organized effort. They discovered that these traffic stops weren't just about checking documents. They were deliberate moves to force people to pay unreasonable fines or even lose their property. From cars to homes, everything was being seized by police officers under the guise of legal action. While the residents simply wanted to live peaceful lives, they were being pushed into financial hardship, with exorbitant fines or pressure to sell their property to survive. The further evidence they uncovered no longer shocked David and Aaron, but it still sent chills down their spines. They found that the police officers weren't just collecting fines or seizing property through official means. They were also using illegal, opaque methods. Those who were stopped had no idea they were being deceived, that they would be forced to transfer their assets to companies linked to high-ranking city officials. Everything seemed to have been orchestrated long ago, a scheme carried out without anyone daring to speak up. David and Aaron realized that to fight this system, they needed not only strong evidence, but also the courage to face immense, powerful forces. The officials involved in the asset seizure campaign were not ordinary people. They had enough power and resources to protect their interests. They could easily twist the truth, erase all evidence, and push people back into the darkness. However, this didn't stop David and Aaron. They knew that if they didn't fight now, innocent families would continue to suffer this injustice. David felt the weight of responsibility, not just for Maya, but for the thousands of families who had been deprived of the chance to live decently. He and Aaron began planning their next steps. They would approach witnesses, gather more independent evidence, but always remain cautious. They couldn't let this injustice continue. Even if they faced danger, they were determined to expose the truth and bring justice to those oppressed. As David and Aaron looked over the final documents they had gathered, they could feel the tension building. What they now held in their hands could change the system, but it also placed them in a life-or-death struggle. They had enough evidence to expose the asset seizure campaign, but would they have the courage to confront those behind it? Although they knew these forces would not be easy to defeat, both were determined not to stop. They understood that while the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, the truth would eventually be revealed, and justice would not be forgotten. David felt exhausted as he left the office at the end of the day, yet his mind kept racing with the new information gathered from the investigation. Things seemed to be progressing in the right direction, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing inside him. Something was off, and David couldn't help but sense that those behind the case wouldn't let him rest. This feeling washed over him like a wave, slowly taking over his mind, making him more vigilant than ever before. His car rolled down the empty road late at night, the dim streetlights reflecting through the car windows, creating an ominous atmosphere. David pressed the gas gently, lost in thought, unaware that a conspiracy was unfolding in the shadows. Every small noise outside the car made him more alert, but he had no idea that he was about to face a much greater danger. As he drove through an isolated stretch of road, David's car was suddenly blocked by another vehicle that appeared ahead. He jolted, immediately slowing down, his eyes glued to the car blocking the road. Before he could react, the car door opened, and a group of men rushed out from the vehicle in front. One man stepped forward, holding a gun, pointing it directly at David. Panic immediately surged through him, but he couldn't think clearly. He only realized that this was not an ordinary robbery. This was a targeted attack, and he had become the target. David quickly recognized that the man before him was experienced in combat, not an amateur. The coldness in his eyes told David that this attack had been carefully planned. No luck would help him escape this situation unless he acted immediately. But David did not let himself be passive. The skills he had acquired in the military environment allowed him to react quickly. He immediately opened the car door and rushed out, avoiding the first gunshot. A tense struggle ensued between the two men. David used his strength and agility to fight off the attacker, not giving him the chance to dominate. The powerful punches from David staggered his opponent, but the attacker held his ground, not yielding. Though it was a struggle, David gradually regained control, but he couldn't stop the pain from the wounds he had sustained during the fight. His body began to tire, cuts and blood began to flow, but his fighting spirit remained strong, refusing to stop. The panic became evident on the attacker's face. Realizing that David was not an easy target, he began to panic, trying to escape the situation. But David wouldn't let him go, determined not to allow the man to escape punishment. The despair in the attacker's eyes made David realize that those behind this attack not only wanted him dead, but also wanted to cover up the truth. This attack was a desperate move in a larger battle, and David couldn't let it end like this. No, In the end, David defeated the attacker. He fell to the ground, unable to continue fighting. David breathed heavily, his body exhausted and in pain, but inside he felt no sense of defeat. Although the attack had failed, David knew it was just a part of the larger war he was fighting. Anger and resilience began to rise within him. Every time he faced danger, he felt more and more that he had to keep going, unable to retreat from these forces. David looked down at the man who had attacked him, his gaze resolute, undeterred. Though weary, he knew he couldn't stop. This action, although failing to kill him, was a clear sign that those behind the plot would not give up. He had to continue this fight, for Maya, for the truth, and for justice. David sat in his office, the light from the desk lamp casting a shadow on the wounds on his body. The pain from the earlier attack still lingered, but he wouldn't let it control him. He knew that if he allowed fatigue or pain to stop him, those behind the assassination attempt would win. They wouldn't stop, and neither could he. This battle was not just his and Maya's. It was a larger fight against the forces that were manipulating and covering up the truth. These people not only protected their power, but also maintained injustice and discrimination in the system. As he tended to his wounds, David realized that his resilience couldn't be stopped by external challenges. He continued searching for evidence. Each document, each small detail could change the outcome. The tension, a vague fear of those behind the attacks, grew stronger within him. But every time he looked at the wounds on his body, he felt stronger. He had to continue. He couldn't stop. He couldn't let fear and pain dictate his action. David didn't know who had orchestrated the attack, but he felt the desperation from those behind it. They realized they were being pushed into a corner and would do anything to protect their power and interests. These people, despite their best efforts to halt the investigation, didn't realize that David was not someone easily defeated. He not only possessed resilience, but also a strong belief in justice. He wouldn't let anyone take away his belief in what was right. Though these forces had tried to threaten him and his family, David kept pressing on. He didn't let the dangers make him hesitate. Each day that passed, David understood that this fight was not a simple battle. The racists and the corrupt in the system would not easily give up their power, but David would not abandon this fight. With every step he took, he moved deeper into the investigation, and the closer he got, the more he felt that the truth was within reach. Though those behind it felt desperate, they couldn't stop. They continued to manipulate the system, doing everything they could to silence those seeking the truth. However, it was in these difficult moments that David realized he couldn't be pushed into a corner. Each challenge only made him stronger. He wouldn't back down. Justice would be served, and the truth would prevail. No matter how hard it got ahead, David wouldn't give up. At the end of the day, as the light in his office dimmed, David sat alone, looking at the documents spread out before him. Physically exhausted, but his spirit had never been stronger. He told himself, "They can attack me, but I won't quit." The faint light in the room seemed to reflect in his eyes, bringing an unshakable strength. He knew that no matter how tough the challenges ahead, he would keep going until the truth was revealed and justice was served. The final scene shows David standing near the window, the streetlights outside casting a glow on his face. From within the dim light, his eyes were unwavering, filled with determination. The challenges ahead couldn't stop him, and David knew that this battle would end with the victory of justice. Maya lay still on the hospital bed, the faint light from the fluorescent bulbs casting a soft glow on her face, creating a quiet atmosphere. The hospital was so quiet that the sounds of the machines seemed like lonely echoes, blending with her steady breathing. The wound had begun to heal, the pain no longer tormenting her, but a sense of unease still clung to her. Maya's tired eyes gazed out of the window, where the fading light of the sunset dimmed away. She knew her physical recovery was underway, but the wounds in her soul remained, still unhealed. Every time she thought of the incident, her heart tightened. The images of the sudden traffic stop, the dismissive glances of the officers, and the brutality when she was attacked still haunted her like a nightmare that wouldn't leave her mind. She could not shake the feeling that a shadow was constantly following her, no matter matter how hard she tried to live a normal life. This fear did not just come from the people who had harmed her, but also from a system full of injustice that she felt she could no longer trust. This system had failed to protect her, and it was the people in power who turned their backs on her. During the quiet nights, when it was just her and the emptiness, Maya realized that she could not live in fear forever. If she did not stand up and fight, everything would remain the same. The people who harmed her would continue to act with impunity, and the system would keep shielding them. The feeling of being abandoned in the hospital, unable to protect herself, made Maya decide that change was necessary. She could no longer lie still, waiting for comfort from others. She had to find a way to break free from this darkness, to reclaim the right to live and be protected for herself and others. Maya felt a fire ignite within her. Although her body had not fully healed, her spirit had already become stronger. Physical difficulties could not extinguish the flame within her. Each day she lay in bed, she reminded herself that she would not let fear control her life. She could not remain a victim forever. Her life may never return to what it once was, but she could change her future by standing up and fighting for the truth, for justice. She began to imagine the future, a future no longer shaped by the image of a girl who had been hurt, but by a resilient warrior, ready to face any challenge. She decided she would no longer be a victim, but someone who would fight for justice. This decision did not come easily, but as she thought about what had happened, Maya knew that this was the only way to protect herself and fight for people like her. This was the moment she not only recovered physically, but also when her soul was reborn, stronger than ever before. As the light outside the window dimmed, Maya looked towards her father, who sat nearby watching her with eyes full of concern. His words of encouragement had helped her stand strong during the most difficult days, but now she needed more than just her father's comfort. She needed to step outside and face the world. "I won't let them win," she whispered to herself, and in that moment, Maya knew that her recovery was not just physical, but mental. A new chapter in her life had begun, and she would never allow fear to stop her again. David entered the hospital room, the dim light from the fluorescent bulbs reflecting off Maya's tired face. She lay there, still not fully recovered, but her strong gaze made him feel the profound change within her. The little girl he had once protected had now grown into someone stronger than ever before. Though her body remained weak, Maya's spirit had transformed. When David looked into his daughter's eyes, he no longer saw a victim, but a true warrior, ready to face new challenges. The atmosphere in the room was quiet, with only the sound of machines and Maya's steady breathing. A sense of worry still clung to David, but he realized that Maya was moving past the pain and beginning to change. She was no longer a powerless victim at the hands of those who abused their power. At this moment, David felt both pride and sorrow. He could see that Maya had started to realize the path she needed to take. Maya looked at her father with a determined expression, feeling the endless love from him. Her time in the hospital had given her the space to think about what she needed to do. She no longer felt that she only needed her father's protection. She felt that it was time for her to stand on her own. She wanted to do something not just for herself, but for others who were being overlooked, just as she had been before. "Dad," Maya began, her voice weak but full of certainty, "I want to become a lawyer. I want to fight for people like me, people who have no voice." David listened to his daughter speak, his heart tightening. Not surprised, but unable to hide his emotion, he understood that this was something Maya had been thinking about for a long time. It was what he had always hoped for her, not just protection, but the ability to stand firm and fight for justice. "You can do it," David responded, his voice warm but full of emotion. "I'll always be here to support you." Maya continued to share with her father why she had chosen this path. "I can't let them win, Dad. I can't let silence continue. I have to fight for the truth, bring those who harmed me into the light," she said, her eyes shining with resolve. Though she knew the path would not be easy, Maya could not ignore what had happened. "I know I'll face many difficulties, even danger, but I'll do whatever it takes. I have to continue." Her voice was firm, like a promise to herself and to her father. David embraced Maya tightly, feeling the determination and resolve in every breath she took. He looked at his daughter, tears falling that could not be stopped, but not from pain, from pride. His daughter, once weak, was now someone who could face any challenge. "I will always be here to protect you," David said, his voice choked but strong. Maya smiled. Though still weak, there was no doubt in her eyes. She knew she was ready to step out and fight. Their story was not just about a worried father and a strong daughter, but also a journey of love and sacrifice. David realized that his daughter had grown, not just as someone who could protect herself, but as someone who would fight for the weak, for justice. The things he had hoped for her before, Maya had now found her own path. Finally, as David looked into Maya's eyes, he saw a profound change in her. She had grown, and she was ready to step into a bigger battle, a battle he could not complete. Maya's decisions and actions would be the greatest motivation for her to move forward. David felt hope, pride, and faith in his daughter. He would never stop supporting her, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. The final image was of David watching his daughter, his heart full of resolve and love, ready to accompany her on this journey. Aaron Wells, an experienced prosecutor who had always lived and worked within the legal system, began to feel drawn into a battle he had never prepared for. At first, he thought he was only helping his longtime friend David investigate Maya's case, but as he delved deeper into the investigation, he realized that he was facing a much larger and more dangerous system than he had imagined. The bond between Aaron and David had always been strong. The two had worked together for many years, and now they were facing off against the hidden forces together. Aaron had always been practical, living in a world full of regulations and barriers, but what he and David were up against was a fight that involved not only the law, but also power, corruption, and those who manipulated everything from the shadows. Step by step, as the investigation unfolded, Aaron began to realize the gravity of the situation. Officers like Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, who had acted wrongly without fear of punishment, were not isolated individuals but part of a powerful system, protected by high-ranking officials. Aaron grew more anxious as he realized that the people behind the case were not easily defeated individuals. They had power, influence, and, most importantly, the ability to make evidence disappear and paralyze any attempts to expose the truth. Aaron couldn't help but feel hesitation, especially as he realized he was faced with a significant decision. As a prosecutor, he was entrusted with the power to work within the confines of the law, but now he was facing a battle where nothing was certain. Could he stand up against high-ranking officials he had always seen as those with unlimited power? Could he continue to stand by David without being dragged into dangers that could ruin his career or even threaten the lives of himself and his family? This question haunted Aaron every night, but the bond between him and David grew stronger throughout the investigation. Although there were moments when Aaron felt anxious and confused, he also realized that David was not alone in this battle. Every time David faced a threat, every time Aaron looked into his friend's eyes, he felt he had to do something, not just for justice, but for friendship and loyalty. Gradually, Aaron understood that this fight was not just David's. It was a fight for those who could not speak up, for those who were oppressed and forgotten in the corrupt system. When he looked into David's determined eyes, he knew that he could not give up, that the truth had to be exposed, no matter what they had to face. Aaron's decision didn't come immediately. He spent much time thinking, weighing every possibility, but in the end he chose to stand by David. They began to develop a more detailed plan, collecting irrefutable evidence, and finding ways to bring those responsible to light. Aaron was not just a friend, but a teammate in this fight, and their relationship grew even stronger. As they continued to face challenges and dangers, Aaron understood that not only justice, but also friendship and loyalty would be the driving force. After leaving the archive with important documents in hand, David and Aaron thought they had evaded the agent's attention, but an unsettling feeling began to rise within them as they stepped into the police station's courtyard, a place that felt eerily quiet, yet offered no guarantee of safety. Just moments later, as they turned out of a narrow alley, police cars started rolling by, moving slowly but never stopping. Neither of them said a word. They merely exchanged anxious glances, the rising panic palpable. They realized they had been spotted, and the agents had started tailing them. With no time to hesitate, David and Aaron quickly moved forward, their hearts pounding as though they might burst from their chests. The tension was overwhelming. They couldn't stop or look back. They just had to run as fast as they could. The sound of hurried footsteps, their frantic breathing, and the flashing lights from the police cars behind them only heightened their fear. They ran through narrow streets, no longer thinking, only focused on every stride taking them closer to safety. The surroundings seemed to blur in their panic, the sound of car engines ringing in the air, making them feel surrounded. They darted through tight alleys, hiding between deserted blocks, but never slowed down. Each time they glanced back, they saw the police cars closing in, their flashing lights illuminating every corner. Both David and Aaron felt the rising tension, the threat looming everywhere. Each step, each gasping breath was a battle with themselves, with their fear. The danger was not only from the officers chasing them, but also from the worry and claustrophobia in their hearts. They had to avoid all attention, find any way not to be caught, and at the same time, ensure they wouldn't be exposed during their escape. One thought dominated their minds. They had to get out of this area, escape the trap without leaving a trace. The chase grew fiercer as they ran through more crowded streets, where the locals remained unaware of the danger they were facing. Each glance back showed the police cars getting closer, as if they were being cornered. But now, there was no turning back. They had to do whatever it took to escape, though their options were running out. The tension made it impossible for them to think clearly, each step like a leap into desperation. Suddenly, as they turned a corner onto a deserted street, one of the police cars sped toward them at high speed. David and Aaron had no time to think. They just bolted into a hiding spot they had unintentionally discovered, an abandoned construction site. Old containers and piles of construction materials became the perfect hiding place. They ducked behind the containers, panting heavily, not daring to make a sound. The police cars' lights flashed by, but luckily they had escaped their line of sight. They held their breath in the darkness, knowing that even the smallest mistake would give them away immediately. Everything fell silent, but the worry still lingered. After a few minutes of tense waiting, with no more noise or lights, they dared to stand up and look at each other. Cold sweat covered their bodies, but the temporary feeling of safety couldn't ease the tension in their hearts. They had escaped, but would this be the last time they faced danger? Would the agent team return and continue searching for them? Although they had gathered important documents, the battle was far from over. One thing was clear, however. This time, they had made a decisive move. The tension remained, but David and Aaron now had what they needed to keep fighting for justice. David and Aaron continued their investigation, but this time they faced a greater challenge than ever before. After a tense chase, they began to realize that the hidden forces within the police department were trying to stop them. The documents they had gathered from the archives were only the beginning, and not enough to break the network of discrimination that had existed for many years. A sense of frustration began to spread as they realized they had reached a dead end, unable to move forward without a major breakthrough. During one of their moves into a more dangerous area of the police department, one that was more heavily guarded, they unexpectedly encountered an agent they hadn't recognized before. This agent was not a stranger. Both David and Aaron were surprised to recognize that he was an old teammate of David's from his time in the military. Shock overwhelmed David, and a mixed feeling of doubt began to arise. Although they had known each other for years, now everything felt uncertain. They didn't know whether this was a coincidence or a trap. set by the forces they were fighting against. The agent didn't speak immediately, only standing still and watching them. At first, David and Aaron thought he might be part of the discriminatory network they were trying to expose. However, when David's gaze met the agent's, he sensed a shift in his eyes. Doubt gradually gave way to trust as the agent spoke up, revealing that he was on a mission under orders from his superiors. But when he realized David and Aaron were in danger, he couldn't just stand by. "David, I can't let you guys get hurt. I've been wrong," the agent began, his voice hoarse. "Throughout my time in the military, I fought beside you, but when I joined the police force, I became part of a system I despised. I stepped back and watched wrong things happen without acting." His eyes lowered, filled with torment. David remained silent, but memories of fighting alongside his old teammate flooded back. They had overcome countless challenges and tough battles together, and David had always admired the loyalty and resilience of this teammate. Now, hearing him admit his guilt, David understood that he was struggling with the choice between his conscience and his profession. He didn't want to continue living in guilt, and this was his only chance to redeem his past mistakes. "So why are you helping me? Why are you standing with us now?" Aaron spoke up, breaking the heavy silence between them. The agent took a deep breath before replying. "I want to atone for my mistakes, to make up for what I've done wrong. Helping you, David, is the only way I can do that. You and I fought for justice together. Now I can't just watch you fight against injustice without getting involved." David said nothing, but he could feel the sincerity in his old friend's words. The agent continued, "I know this could cost me everything. If they find out I'm helping you, my career will be over. But I can't ignore it anymore." Although knowing this decision could put him in more danger than ever before, the agent was resolute. He wasn't running away from responsibility, but was standing up to the mistakes of his past. "Justice must be served, even if I have to sacrifice everything." David and Aaron exchanged looks, knowing this was a turning point in their fight. Not only did they have an ally now, but also an old friend who was determined to change. They continued their conversation with the agent, who promised to provide important information and assist them in the next steps of the investigation. However, he also warned them that this would not be easy. The forces behind the discrimination would not easily forgive a traitor, but in the end, they now had someone on their side in this battle. The conclusion of this part was a testament to the determination and loyalty between the three of them. Despite the ongoing danger, they knew this was their only chance to bring the truth to light. David's old agent had now joined them, and they all understood that the battle against injustice was only just beginning. After David's old agent decided to help, the three of them began planning their next moves. However, not long after they began collecting evidence, David and Aaron realized that this agent's assistance wasn't as simple as they had thought. He didn't just want to help David out of loyalty or duty, but for a deeper reason. This agent wasn't just looking to help David break the discriminatory network within the police. He was also trying to redeem past wrongs, mistakes he had made while still part of that system. In a face-to-face conversation, the old agent admitted that he couldn't continue living in guilt. He had once been part of the group that protected the discriminators, sometimes even through actions he couldn't forgive himself for. "I did things I'm not proud of," he told David, his eyes filled with remorse. "I know I betrayed the ideals you and I fought for." These words made David reflect deeply. He realized this wasn't just a battle against discrimination, but also an inner struggle for his old teammate, someone he had once trusted. David gradually realized that this agent's help wasn't just about standing with him. This was an opportunity to change a corrupt system he had been fighting against for so many years. However, this decision wasn't easy. The agent had to face immense pressure from colleagues in the force, people he had once worked with. Helping David meant betraying those he had fought beside and sacrificing his career and honor. Furthermore, the risk of being betrayed by those behind the discrimination was ever present. Nevertheless, David could feel the trust the agent had placed in him. The change in the agent's eyes made David realize that loyalty and friendship could still be powerful forces in this fight. Their relationship, despite all the challenges and storms, had now become a necessary strength in the journey against the discriminatory system. With the agent's help, David and Aaron began to take the next steps in the investigation. They now had sensitive documents that only the agent had access to, and these pieces of information were the key to exposing the whole truth. These documents weren't just simple papers. They were solid evidence of the illegal actions of those behind the case. The agent provided them with important information he had gathered during his time in the force. However, the risks didn't decrease. Every step they took, every bit of information they gathered, could bring them face to face with strong resistance from the hidden forces within the police. Meanwhile, the agent continued to worry about what might happen. He stood before a mirror, looking at himself, wondering whether his actions could really make a difference. He knew that if he was discovered, not only his career but his whole life would be ruined. But deep down, he understood this was the only chance to redeem his past mistakes, to right the wrongs he had ignored in the past. Finally, David and the agent stood united, moving forward in this fight. Both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but only through unity and courage could they achieve justice. This was a crucial turning point in their investigation, and they had no choice but to continue fighting, no matter the dangers waiting ahead. Their friendship and determination were the only driving forces to overcome this challenge. David and his team, after a long period of collecting documents, finally achieved a significant goal: gaining access to someone within the police department whom they had always trusted. This person, a longtime colleague of David, had always supported him throughout the investigation process. They had shared many perspectives on justice and the necessary changes within the police system, and David had always believed this colleague shared the same ideals as him. The trust that David placed in this colleague was unquestionable. They had had many long conversations about justice and what needed to be done to bring to light the hidden truths within the police department. Each time they met, David felt that this person was a crucial part of the fight against discrimination, and he hoped that this colleague would be one of the individuals who would help him push back against the wrongdoers. Although David knew the criminals within the police department were dangerous, he always held on to the belief that solidarity within the department would bring about change. Thus, he placed his hopes on this colleague as a true ally in the fight. When David and Aaron decided to approach this person, they prepared thoroughly. All the documents and information had been gathered carefully, hoping this would be the most important step in exposing the discriminatory practices they were investigating. However, when they met with this colleague, tension began to rise. At first, he seemed supportive and agreed to help them, but gradually his attitude began to shift. Vague answers and evasive remarks made David feel something was wrong. Although he tried to convince his colleague of the importance of the investigation, the ambiguity in his actions only deepened David's suspicions. The tension grew as David realized that what he was hearing was not real support but a deliberate delay. Every time David asked about the documents, this colleague would find ways to shift the conversation or avoid the main issue. This made David uneasy. He couldn't ignore these changes because if his colleague truly intended to help, he would not act so ambiguously. The trust that David had once had in this person began to falter. After a period of careful observation and deep reflection, David decided to confront him directly. He no longer stayed silent but had to ask straightforward questions. Are you hiding something? Why are these documents so vague? Why aren't you being clear about everything? David's words echoed in the tense air, no longer as gentle as before. He needed answers. He needed to know the truth. His colleague could no longer maintain his calm exterior. When faced with David's questioning gaze and determination, he could no longer hide the truth. In the end, David's colleague admitted that he was behind the discriminatory acts they were investigating. He explained that he did it to protect his personal interests and feared the influence of a hidden power network within the police department. Both David and Aaron were shocked by this admission. The betrayal by someone David had once considered a partner in the fight against discrimination truly stunned him. All the words his colleague had said before now seemed like lies, promises broken. Confronted with this betrayal, David felt as though he had been stabbed in the back. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Disappointment, anger, and confusion mixed within him. Someone he had trusted for so many years was now the one behind the discriminatory acts they had been fighting against. This feeling of being deceived made David feel that he could no longer trust anyone in the police department. The final scene of this part is an image of David standing in silence, his eyes fixed on his former colleague with utter disappointment. A big question began to form in his mind: who could he trust in this fight? This betrayal not only eroded his trust in his colleague, but also made it clear that the fight against discrimination in the police department was a merciless battle. Those who had betrayed him would face justice no matter where they hid. After confronting the betrayal of his colleague, David felt a deep sorrow rising within him. He had placed his trust in this person for years, believing they shared the ideals of justice and reform within the police system. But now, the person he had once thought of as an ally was the betrayer, the one behind the discriminatory acts they were trying to expose. The sense of disappointment and pain made David mentally collapse. He had always believed that this fight was for justice, but this betrayal forced him to face a harsh truth. The fight was not only against those outside, but also against the people within his own ranks, those he once thought were his allies. The cost of trust had now become an unavoidable shock. David stopped, wondering if anyone in the police department truly wanted change, or if it was all just a play to maintain personal power. The feeling of isolation, not being able to trust anyone, weighed heavily on him. Each day, everything around him seemed to become more obscure, as those he once saw as allies were ready to betray the very ideals he stood for. Doubts began to creep into David's mind, and every step he took felt less certain than before. He not only had to face the criminals outside, but also had to find ways to deal with those within his ranks, those who might be hiding dark secrets. The confrontation with the betraying colleague was not only a battle with external enemies, but also a fierce internal battle within David. He had to face the painful question: could he continue fighting for change within the police department when one of the people he trusted most had betrayed him? Did he have the strength to maintain his resolve when his own teammate had hurt him so cruelly? The doubt and exhaustion within him grew as he had to ask himself whether this investigation was really worth it, as each step brought him closer to the unraveling of the trust he had built. In a tense conversation between David and his colleague, the truth gradually came to light. His colleague explained that he had no other choice. According to him, the police system had become too powerful, and he couldn't fight against it. A series of justifications followed, but David couldn't accept them. His colleague's story was filled with confusion, but for David it was nothing but weak excuses for betrayal. This colleague had not only betrayed him, but also betrayed the very justice he had hoped for. This made David feel the pain like an incurable wound. In the fight for justice, old friends can become unimaginable enemies. They were no longer allies, but major obstacles in the battle David was facing. Ultimately, David realized that he couldn't stop. Despite being betrayed, he still had to keep fighting. His decision was made in an important moment, not to let this betrayal derail his fight. He knew that the truth would always find a way to come to light, even if it cost him everything. Facing betrayal, David did not weaken. He only felt more determined to expose all those who practiced discrimination within the system. This fight was not only about justice, but also about the relentless battle between good and evil, between trust and betrayal. The feeling of betrayal did not weaken David. It made him stronger to continue the path he had chosen, knowing that it would never be easy. After gathering enough evidence from the Atlanta Police Department, David and his team stood at a significant crossroads. They knew that this evidence could change the entire system, but the question remained, should they make it public immediately? This decision was not simply about revealing the truth. It was a powerful action that could stir a massive public uproar, threatening the lives and careers of everyone involved. David's team was standing at the threshold of a battle whose consequences they could not fully predict. The tension in the meeting room was escalating. Each team member had their own thoughts and concerns. Fears about safety, family, and careers hung in the air. but they all knew that this was a life-and-death decision. David and Aaron, as the leaders, began to discuss the next steps. Both understood that once they made this decision, there would be no turning back. David looked at each member of the team seriously and warned them of the danger they faced. This was not just a fight for justice for Maya, it was a struggle against a powerful, discriminatory system. The forces behind this case were not only strong, but ruthless. They would never let David and his team go unpunished if they made everything public. However, David could no longer live in silence. He could not allow Maya and other innocent people to continue suffering these injustices. Maya, although recovered and determined to join the fight, could not hide her anxiety about her family. She knew that if everything were exposed, her family would be in grave danger. The unease was evident in her eyes, but she also understood that this was a moment when standing still was not an option. She had to rise, even knowing the consequences could be severe. Aaron, although he had agreed to join David, still struggled with internal conflict. As a prosecutor, his career was tied to upholding the law. But this fight was not as simple as that. His actions not only threatened his career, but also the safety of himself and his family. Though he had committed to standing with David, he could not help but feel fear when facing the powerful officials behind this case. He wondered if he had enough courage to confront those who had manipulated this system for years. But David would not allow these negative emotions to influence the team's decision. He looked into each person's eyes, affirming that this was their only opportunity to bring justice. We cannot continue to live in silence when we know the truth. We will do what is right, even if we have to sacrifice, David said, his voice full of determination. He knew that if they did not act now, everything they had done would be meaningless. This fight was not just his, but for everyone who believed in justice and truth. This was the time for them to rise, not just for Maya, but for the millions of others living in the shadows of discrimination. This conversation marked a major turning point in the characters' mindset. They began to realize that this fight was not just about documents and evidence, but about real change in a system that had been rotting for a long time. Exposing the truth would not only change the lives of David and his team, but also society as a whole. They were ready to face the consequences, no matter how difficult. This was their battle. After the discussion, David's team finally decided to make the documents and evidence public. Although they knew this would expose them to unprecedented danger, they could not back down. Fear still lingered in every glance. But they all knew that only by standing up and telling the truth could they change something. The final scene of this section showed David and his team preparing for the tough fight ahead, with determination and faith in justice. Every step they took from now on would no longer be a personal decision, but a step forward for all those who longed for justice in an unjust system. Once the decision was made to reveal the evidence, David and his team realized that everything had changed. They were no longer quietly gathering information. Now they would directly face the powerful forces behind the system. Every action they took, even the smallest step, could lead to unimaginable consequences. Throughout the tense meeting, everyone in the group could feel the anxiety in the air. David knew that justice could only prevail if they brought the truth to light, but he also understood that doing so would plunge them into a dangerous whirlpool. The sighs, the anxious glances exchanged among team members said it all. Despite preparing themselves for this, when the moment arrived, they could not help but feel fear. The tension of a battle with an uncertain outcome made them anxious. Each person in the group had to face the truth that their survival now hung in the balance, and the consequences would affect not only themselves, but their loved ones as well. David and Aaron, the leaders of this fight, especially felt the weight of their mission. David was not only fighting for Maya's justice, but also for the people he loved. Revealing this evidence meant they would confront an entire discriminatory system that had deeply rooted itself in society. He felt the numbness in his body whenever he thought about what was coming, the sensation of death lurking close by, threatening them every second. But he could not stop, even though the danger was unavoidable. Aaron, once filled with worry, had now become a true warrior. He was no longer the fearful man, but someone resolute in his decision. Every step, every decision was carefully calculated. He knew that his career and family were at risk, but only by confronting this injustice could he maintain his integrity and self-respect. Confronting imminent death did not make him retreat, it pushed him further forward. Looking into David's eyes, he saw the unwavering determination and fighting spirit that would never falter. Every time they moved, a feeling of tension filled the air. The footsteps of the entire team echoed through the empty streets. Everything around them seemed to slow down, and the only sound they could hear was their footsteps. Each time they looked back, they saw the dark figures of those following them. Every light behind them made their hearts race faster, but they knew there was no turning back. They had to keep moving forward. They could not afford to retreat, because each step back would undo everything they had worked for. The sense of death pursuing them was real, but they knew this was the challenge they had to overcome. David and Aaron were no longer fighting just for Maya, but for all the innocent people crushed by this system. This fight was not just theirs, but for everyone who longed for justice. Finally, when they stood on top of a tall building, looking down at the city below in the dim light, they knew that the next steps they took would not just change their lives, but be part of history. David looked into the eyes of each team's member and realized that they were ready. No more fear, no more hesitation. Each person in the team now had a fierce belief in justice. They stood there, not to retreat, but to continue the fight to the end. The feeling of impending death could not scare them. On the contrary, it only made them more determined, more powerful. With this resolve, David and his team were ready to enter the final battle. Every step they took from here would be a step further on the path to reclaiming justice, no matter the price they had to pay. But they were ready, and nothing could stop their progress. Samantha Grant is a renowned investigative journalist who has dedicated many years to the field of journalism. She is not only distinguished by her sharp analytical skills, but also by her tireless persistence in seeking the truth, regardless of the dangers that her profession brings. However, she has a complicated past. In the early years of her career, Samantha worked with many powerful figures within the system, which made her a character with numerous connections to both the powerful elite and those in the shadows. These connections helped her achieve success, but also left her with much inner conflict. When she witnessed the shooting of Maya, a young woman, during a racially motivated traffic stop, Samantha could not stand by. She felt the injustice Maya suffered was unforgivable. After hearing about the incident, Samantha began to dig deeper and investigate, deciding to join the fight for justice for Maya and her family. Her empathy for David, Maya's father, only strengthened her resolve. She could not stand by and watch the truth be hidden, especially when she discovered that the forces behind the shooting were being protected by a deeply entrenched, discriminatory system. The meeting between Samantha and David took place in a small cafe, where the space around them seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them. Samantha had prepared meticulously for this meeting, bringing information that David could not easily access. The connections between the police officers, particularly Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, and the real estate developers in the area were crucial details that David needed to know. In just a few short exchanges, they quickly realized the necessity of collaborating. Both understood that this fight was not simple. It was about dismantling a system of discrimination that had existed for far too long. Samantha was not only a source of information, but also a reliable ally. With her years of experience, she had the ability to gather evidence meticulously and employed a sharp investigative method. She was unafraid to take risks, regardless of the dangers that might arise. To obtain accurate information, Samantha repeatedly infiltrated dangerous areas, reached out to witnesses, and approached those who had been threatened and silenced. She used her connections in the press and media to safely disseminate information while skillfully avoiding surveillance from those forces intent on protecting their illicit interests. Her perseverance and intelligence were key in helping David access crucial evidence that, without Samantha, he would never have discovered. However, their investigation was not without its difficulties. A sudden tense situation arose when Samantha and David went to meet an important source in a deserted area. Just as they approached their target, an unexpected event forced them to leave quickly. The chaotic and dangerous scene required Samantha to use all of her abilities to keep things from spiraling out of control. She and David had to flee without gathering all the information they hoped for, but even so, Samantha held firmly to her faith in investigative journalism. It was her support and determination that kept David from losing hope in this fight. They both knew that no matter the dangers, the truth was something they had to pursue. Through everything she witnessed, Samantha realized that this was not just an ordinary investigation, but a high-risk battle that she had to fight for reasons beyond her career. Her compassion for Maya, for David and his family, led her to face challenges she never imagined. But as she got closer to the truth, the pressure from her superiors grew increasingly intense. The people in the media industry she had once worked with began to pay attention to the information she had been gathering. Samantha realized that if she continued on this path, her career would be at risk, and she might have to pay a heavy price. However, she had no other choice. Once she entered this fight, she could not stop. The conclusion of this part highlights the strong bond between Samantha and David. They were not just colleagues in the battle against discrimination, but also determined warriors in the struggle for justice. Together, they would face the hidden forces and expose every secret in the system, but they also had to be ready for the harsh challenges ahead. Samantha began to feel the mounting pressure from her superiors as her investigation entered more complex and difficult territories. Calls from powerful figures in the media and political spheres kept urging her to stop, or at least change the direction of her investigation. These individuals had deep ties to the power structures she was now probing, and they wanted her to stop digging into secrets that could shake the system. A direct meeting with her supervisor further clarified the tension. He demanded that she stop investigating Maya's case, citing the sensitivity of the case and the potential impact it could have on fragile political relationships. This was a difficult decision, and for Samantha, it put her in a tough spot. She had committed to the fight for justice, but now her career and personal safety were at risk. The feeling of being torn between professional ethics and personal safety began to weigh heavily on Samantha. She could not ignore the injustice that David's family was suffering, but at the same time, she understood that continuing the investigation could cost her everything. The sleepless nights, the questions in her mind about whether she could continue fighting for the truth without harming those she loved, consumed her. The thoughts about past decisions and future consequences haunted her. She realized that following her superior's orders would keep her safe, personally, but it would also be a blow to her conscience and journalistic integrity. Samantha had once been determined to pursue this career with noble ideals, but now she had to choose between justice and self-preservation. The pressure came not only from her superiors, but also from her colleagues. Some of the journalists she had worked with for years were now being forced to remain silent, and some even advised her to stop and not continue the investigation. They argued that fighting against this power structure was futile and would only bring unnecessary risks. However, the more she was threatened, the more determined Samantha became. She decided to face her supervisor directly and declared that she would not stop. In a tense conversation, Samantha made it clear that justice was the only goal she pursued despite the threatening calls and warnings from her superiors. She realized that if she backed down now, everything she had done would be meaningless. Samantha's decision was not easy, but in the end she chose to continue the investigation. She went to David and told him that she would not give up. The dangers she faced were growing, but she understood that she could not turn her back on Maya's family, that she could not let the truth remain buried. This was a pivotal moment in Samantha's development. From being a freelance investigative journalist solely focused on the work, she became someone fighting not just for her profession, but also for her conscience. She was ready to sacrifice her personal safety to pursue justice, fully aware that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. The conclusion of this part clearly demonstrates Samantha's courage and determination. She stood up against the dark forces trying to protect the discrimination within the system. This decision not only highlighted the bond between her and David, but also marked an important moment in showing her resilience. Together, they would not only face the challenges of justice, but also confront a power structure filled with discrimination. The tension in David's investigation continued to escalate as new evidence began to reveal widespread discrimination within the Atlanta Police Department. Senior officials in the agency began to worry about the risk of being exposed. David could clearly sense that not only his family, but also he was facing a real threat. The fight for justice was no longer just about seeking the truth, but also a direct confrontation with dangerous forces, those willing to do anything to protect their interests. Tonight, David left the office late, contemplating his next steps in exposing the discrimination. The documents and new evidence he had gathered could change the course of the investigation, but he knew that the closer he got to the truth, the greater the danger. Driving home in the dark, David felt a rare sense of peace amidst the tension. However, the peace was short-lived as he noticed an unfamiliar car following him. At first, he thought it was just a passing vehicle, but after a few minutes the car was still tailing him, showing no signs of leaving. David's anxiety began to rise, and he started noticing the abnormal behavior of the car behind him. The deserted road only heightened his tension, and he began to watch more closely. When the car started pressing him and increasing the pressure, David immediately realized he was being followed. He felt the danger closing in. With no time to return home, David decided to drive to a secluded area where he could find temporary safety. Just a few minutes later, David stopped his car at a deserted intersection, the only company being himself and the car following behind. As soon as he stepped out of the vehicle, a group of assailants appeared from hidden corners, quickly surrounding and attacking him. The smell of gunpowder was pungent, bullets whizzed through the air, and the shouts of the attackers echoed. David quickly regained his composure and used his military skills to fight back. He knew he couldn't afford to be captured alive, but the number of attackers was too great, and their weapons were superior, slowly overwhelming him. David had no choice but to fight for his life. Despite his courage and determination, in the critical moment, he was shot in the shoulder. Blood began to pour out, making him feel dizzy, but he refused to give up, choosing to fight until the end. At a moment when all hope seemed lost, an unfamiliar car suddenly sped toward him and quickly stopped beside David. A middle-aged man, who seemed to be a former soldier, rushed out, pulled David into the car, and sped away at high speed. This unexpected appearance stunned David, but he understood that he had been saved. The man, with his strong and calm demeanor, showed clear experience in combat. He didn't speak much, quietly driving through the dark streets, taking David to a safe place. David knew he had escaped death, but a great doubt arose in his mind. Who had sent the assassins to kill him? How powerful were these forces? After being taken to a safe location, David still felt exhausted and pained from his injuries. However, he couldn't easily forget the events of that night. The man who saved him refused to reveal his identity, leaving only a short message. "This is just the beginning." These words rang like a warning, making David realize that his fight was far from over. Greater challenges awaited him, and the danger was ever present. This unexpected rescue from an unexpected person made David understand that even though he was fighting alone, there were still people willing to stand up for justice, even if they had to face great risks. This final scene highlights the tension in the battle David is engaged in. While opening a new chapter filled with schemes and challenges, David woke up in a room whose location was unfamiliar to him. Everything around him was a blur in his mind. The pain from the wound on his body gradually made him more alert, but the exhaustion could not erase the haunting memories of the previous night. The bullets, the gunshots, and the police around him all felt like an ongoing nightmare. He had been attacked by unpredictable assailants, and now, as he was saved, he understood that the mastermind behind this assassination was no ordinary organization. It was a dangerous force, a group of powerful people capable of manipulating the system to protect their own interests. Though he had been saved by a stranger, David still did not feel entirely safe. An unsettling feeling clung to him. The man who rescued him had his own secrets, and perhaps he also had his own reasons for deciding to help. David didn't ask too much about the man's identity, even though he felt uneasy inside. He understood that he could not trust anyone too easily in this fight, especially when his life hung by a thin thread. After David's condition had stabilized a bit, the man who saved him finally decided to sit down and open up. They began a serious conversation, and the man revealed that he had been following David's investigation for a long time. He knew every detail, from David's steps to the people he approached. Gathering such information was usually very difficult, but this man had been able to provide David with important data he could not access on his own. It's not just the police, but also those behind the forces of the tycoons, the man explained. They want to seize valuable real estate in residential areas. The entire system is being manipulated by these people. David listened, his mind spinning with this new information. He realized that the battle was not just about uncovering truth about Maya's case, but also confronting a deeply rooted network of discrimination, a system he had never known before. The people behind all of this were not merely police officers or low-ranking officials. They were powerful people, tycoons with great influence. Gradually, David understood that the man who saved him was a valuable source of information, someone who could help him dig deeper into the dark secrets of these forces. However, this help also made him reconsider the risks. This man could be an ally in the fight against discrimination, but was it safe to continue collaborating? Could he trust what the man said, or was this all part of a game by those behind the scenes to control David from behind? Although the feeling of insecurity still weighed heavily on him, David knew he could not stop. Despite his life being in danger, he understood that if he didn't continue the investigation, everything he had done so far would be in vain. This battle was not just about justice for his family, but also a struggle to expose a system full of discrimination and crime. Therefore, David decided to carry on. The man who saved him proposed a bold plan. It was a dangerous move, but it was the only chance to access more crucial evidence. He advised David to continue the investigation, with support from unexpected allies David hadn't anticipated. This scene highlights David's resilience, as he doesn't give up even though everything around him is falling apart. Despite being attacked and nearly losing his life, he refuses to back down. David's situation changed dramatically. Though injured and exhausted, he didn't hesitate. Every step he took led to more significant discoveries. New details began to unfold, and David felt that he was getting closer to the truth. His life now was not only a fight for his family, but also a struggle against a system full of dark forces. A system he would not turn back from, no matter how dangerous it became. In the end, David realized that help from unexpected sources was exactly what he needed to continue his journey. The closing scene leaves a strong message. In this fight, every bit of help, whether surprising or not, can change the course of events and bring them closer to justice. David understood that, although many challenges lay ahead, he would never give up. David stood alone in the darkness of the empty house, feeling as if his life were at a crossroads full of difficult choices. Every decision he made, every step he took, brought him closer to dangers he could have never imagined before. The deep-rooted discrimination within the Atlanta Police Department was slowly coming to light, and with the evidence he held, David was on the verge of opening a door that could expose everything. However, the closer he got to the truth, the more he realized that the danger wasn't just to him, but to his loved ones as well. After the failed assassination attempt, when he nearly lost his life at the hands of those trying to protect the system's secrets, David felt more clearly than ever that the threat came not only from criminals, but also from powerful forces within the government. He began to realize that his fight for justice was putting his family in an incredibly dangerous position. Maya, his daughter, was still struggling with the psychological and physical trauma from the shooting, and every day she saw the tension in her father's eyes. David knew he couldn't stop, but Maya's anxiety made him reconsider everything. Every time he looked into Maya's eyes, David wondered if he could continue the investigation without putting his family in further danger. He couldn't forget the words Maya had said to him, that she didn't want to see her father hurt anymore. But at the same time, he knew that if he did nothing, if he didn't stand up against this injustice, then all the sacrifices of those fighting alongside him would be in vain. It was a conflict that David couldn't easily resolve in his mind. He understood that justice and family were at odds, and he had to choose between the lofty ideals of justice and the responsibility of protecting his loved one. The sleepless nights began to weigh heavily on David's soul. He questioned whether he was worthy of the sacrifices being made. He could have given up the investigation, avoided the danger, but if he did, he would never be able to forgive himself. His heart was full of turmoil and pain as he faced the reality that every decision going forward would have unforeseen consequences. He felt as if he were trapped between two choices that couldn't be balanced. One evening, when Maya felt better and was able to talk with her father, they had an important conversation. With concern in her eyes, Maya couldn't help but express her fear for the dangers her father was facing. She said she couldn't bear to watch him enter a fight she couldn't protect him from. Maya wanted him to rest, stay away from danger, and stop the investigation. Her words cut into David's heart like a knife. He understood that it wasn't just a fight for justice, but a fight to protect his family. Yet, he couldn't simply give up, because he knew that the truth needed to be known. David tried to reassure Maya, explaining that this fight wasn't for him, but for all those who were oppressed, for families like theirs. He couldn't stand by and watch discrimination continue to destroy the system without doing anything. But in Maya's eyes, he saw worry and confusion that couldn't be hidden. The conflict between two worlds, between ideals and love, became clearer than ever. Maya asked him to choose, and David knew that no matter what he did, this fight would always come at a cost, and not everyone would understand why he had to continue. After the conversation with Maya, David stood in the darkness of the house, feeling as if he had reached a crossroads where every path was fraught with challenge. He knew that if he didn't continue the investigation, all of his previous efforts would be in vain. But if he did, he would face even greater danger, not just to his own life, but to the lives of those he loved. The big question of sacrifice and responsibility still echoed in his mind. Was justice worth the price it demanded? Could he protect his family while continuing the fight for the truth? The sense of conflict within David grew more intense. He knew he couldn't give up, but at the same time, he couldn't easily accept that this fight would cause his loved ones to pay a price. The conclusion of this part leaves a big question in David's mind, highlighting the tension between justice and family love, and setting the stage for a pivotal moment in his journey. After a long night of reflection, David couldn't stop. With each passing moment, he realized that his fight wasn't just for himself, but for all the innocent people who would continue to suffer the brutality of this discriminatory system if no one stood up. He knew that, no matter the greater dangers he faced, he had to continue. The ones who discriminated wouldn't stop until they had complete control, and if he didn't stand up, they would keep destroying everything. Still, the thoughts of Maya made his heart ache. She had already endured so much pain and worry, and now he was about to drag her into another battle, not just his fight, but his family's. The feeling of helplessness in protecting his daughter hurt deeply. However, David understood that no matter how much he wanted to protect his family, if he didn't continue, not just his family, but many other families would suffer the unforgivable injustice. He needed to hurry, and gestured to the unforgivable injustice had to be served, and he was the only one who could do it. Deciding to continue the investigation wasn't an easy choice. David knew that with every step he took, he was putting himself in greater danger. He had to act more carefully than ever before, not just to protect his family, but also to stay true to the path he had chosen. No more hasty actions, no more blind decisions. He would have to be smarter, using the relationships and resources at his disposal to continue the investigation without putting his family at greater risk. He also knew that if he worked alone, he wouldn't succeed. So he began to think about ways to better protect Maya and keep her from being drawn into the dangers of this fight. Throughout this process, Aaron's support became indispensable. Aaron had always been a reliable companion in David's journey. He was not only a colleague in their work, but also a sincere friend, always ready to support David whenever needed. The two of them sat down together and planned their next move. With his experience and sharp mind, Aaron helped David recognize dangers he hadn't anticipated and find safer ways to continue the investigation. They exchanged important information and together came up with strategies to keep fighting without putting David's loved ones at risk. Although David felt heartbroken and anxious, he didn't give up. He knew that if he did nothing, he would just allow these criminal forces to continue manipulating and stealing the most valuable things. He had decided that he wouldn't turn back, no matter how difficult it got. He would fight to the end. His resolve was further strengthened by his companions, those who had always stood by him. They were the ones who helped him not feel alone in this battle. The closing scene of this part clearly demonstrates David's resilience and determination. He had chosen justice not just for himself, but for those he loved. He knew that this battle would have no end, and the challenges ahead would be much greater, but he was ready. He couldn't go back because everything he had been through was too important. The feeling that life had meaning when he stood up against discrimination, against injustice, was something David would never give up. He looked ahead, no longer filled with doubt, no longer questioning useless things. This battle had never been clearer, and David knew that with the help of his companions, he would never be alone in this fight. David stood in the small room, the dim light casting a soft glow on his face as he saw his friends and colleagues gathered around the table. Aaron and Samantha sat opposite him, each wearing an expression of tension. They all knew that the upcoming battle would not only be a confrontation with discriminatory police officers, but also a fight against a larger system, protected by powerful officials in government and real estate moguls. The underground connections, built over many years, were now at risk of collapsing, and breaking them was no easy task. "We can't do this alone," David said, his voice low and firm. "Without the support of federal agents, all our efforts will be nothing more than empty words against these forces. They will not stop threatening us, and they may even force us into silence." Aaron nodded, his face filled with concern. "You're right, but we have to be careful. One wrong move and everything will collapse. The officials in the police department won't make it easy for us to expose their truths." Samantha, with her sharp mind and relentless fighting spirit, presented a detailed media strategy. "I'll connect with major media outlets, but we must be very cautious. The witnesses and documents need to be protected, and we have to ensure no one in the group gets hurt." She looked at everyone, her gaze resolute. "I know you're all worried, but if we don't go public, we'll just keep walking in the dark. We have to let everyone see the true face of this system." David paused for a moment, then looked at Aaron. "So, who will we coordinate with?" At that moment, the door to the room opened, and a woman walked in. Laura Reed, an experienced federal agent, entered with a cold and serious demeanor. Her gaze silenced the room, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. David stood up, unable to hide the tension when he saw her. "Laura," David said, his voice a bit weary but also hopeful, "we can finally work together." Reed nodded slightly. "I've been following this case for a long time. This is an important opportunity to clean up this system. I can't let these people continue to act covertly without facing consequences." Samantha and Aaron fell silent, watching the tension between David and Laura, understanding that this was a confrontation bigger than anyone in the room could have imagined. Laura had been a part of the federal agent team for many years, and she knew well that with every wrong move, thousands of people would be destroyed by those in power. She herself had gone through countless struggles to fight against these forces. "We need to move quickly and precisely," Laura said, her gaze sharp. "The evidence you've gathered will be the foundation, but we also need the involvement of high-level authorities to verify and arrest the leaders. They aren't just discriminatory police officers, but part of a bigger system we need to bring down." The exchange between David and Laura was tense. They both knew that justice was not easy to achieve, especially when facing such a network of power, but neither of them was willing to back down. They understood that, no matter the danger ahead, leaving things as they were would be a betrayal of everything they had fought for. Finally, the group decided to act immediately. The federal agents would approach the discriminatory police officials, begin gathering more evidence, and prepare for the official official assault on this system. David couldn't suppress his emotions as he witnessed the first scene of change. The people he and Maya had suffered under were now being escorted out of their offices, handcuffed and pale with fear. This scene was not just a significant step in his battle, but also a reminder that no matter how powerful the system, the truth would eventually come to light. David looked into the eyes of the arrested discriminatory officers, his heart filled with emotions he could not express. He wasn't just fighting for Maya, but for all the nameless victims abandoned by the system. And today, justice has begun to be served. The scene unfolded as federal agents, in coordination with David's investigation team, launched a large assault on the Atlanta police facilities and real estate developers linked to the discrimination case. Each move by the agents was swift and precise. The discriminatory officers didn't have time to react when the raid occurred. The offices of the discriminatory officials, those who had been running the city, were now breached and exposed. Every time a door was smashed open, things became clearer. Hidden files, fraudulent documents, illegal contracts, all were uncovered. High-ranking officials were arrested, including Mark Riley and Ben Taylor, the ones who had caused Maya's shooting and concealed their violent actions. In addition, there were officials from the government and police department, those who had believed their power would shield them from consequences. But now, no one could escape the law's punishment. When the raid began, the federal agents not only gathered evidence, but also arrested key criminals involved in the discrimination case. All those arrested looked panicked. They hadn't expected that one day their criminal actions would be exposed so quickly. Some tried to escape, but all failed. The agents worked professionally, leaving no opportunity for anyone to avoid punishment. Names like Mark Riley, Ben Taylor, and other high-ranking officials were now handcuffed and escorted out. David stood at the back, among the federal agents watching the entire process. Although he couldn't hide his satisfaction seeing those who had caused his family so much pain now bound by the law, the pain in his heart had not yet been erased. Maya had suffered too much, and while justice had been served, there were wounds that couldn't be healed in his soul. Each criminal arrested, each file exposed was a part of his fight, but the suffering his family had endured couldn't be compensated with a simple victory. When Mark Riley, the one who had shot Maya, was arrested, David couldn't contain his emotions. They stood facing each other, their eyes meeting in a tense moment. Mark Riley, seeing David's eyes full of hatred, couldn't face him. Both stood still for a moment, as if time had stopped. Riley, who had caused so much pain to David's family, couldn't find any words to defend himself. His face was pale, his eyes full of cowardice and guilt. David, standing firm in this confrontation, didn't say a word. He just looked into Riley's eyes, and although he didn't speak, everything that needed to be said was conveyed in his gaze. The criminals were brought to light, and major discrimination cases began to be processed in court. The evidence David and his team had gathered would help expose the truth, bringing those behind this discriminatory system into the light. But David understood that this fight was far from over. Justice had been served, but this was only the first step in the long journey ahead. Although the emotional wounds had not yet healed, and although his family's life would never return to how it was before, David felt a sense of relief when he saw the wrongdoers punished. He knew that this would not just be a personal victory, but a major step forward for justice and change within the police and government systems. Maya would have the chance to live the life she deserved, and broad reforms would help prevent such discriminatory and racist behaviors in the future. David's fight didn't just end with the arrest of the discriminatory officers. It opened a new chapter for change within the legal and police systems. Justice had been served, but this battle had only just begun. Maya stood in front of the law school's door, feeling a strange new air. The long months she had endured were full of physical and mental pain, but now she had decided to embark on a new journey. To get here, Maya had to overcome countless challenges, sleepless nights, grueling study sessions, and moments of exhaustion that seemed like they would defeat her. Yet, every time she thought of her mother, Angela, who had sacrificed her entire life for her, Maya found the strength to keep going. Her mother had always been her biggest supporter, teaching her that no matter what, she must always persevere in the pursuit of justice. She knew her mother was no longer with her, but the lessons she had been taught would forever guide her throughout her life. Maya sat at her desk flipping through the dry pages of law books, but in her heart she knew that this path would not be easy. The nights of intense studying and the tough exams left her feeling exhausted. She often stayed up late, her eyes weary and her body drained, yet she never once considered giving up. The pain of the past still haunted her. Memories of Maya's shooting, her family, and her mother. Everything came flooding back to her mind. However, Maya learned not to let the ghosts of the past stop her from chasing her dreams. She knew her mother had hoped she would fight against injustice and racism in society, and that was why she couldn't stop. Day by day, Maya met new friends in class, each of them facing their own struggles. Some had experienced racism, others had gone through grief and loss. They became companions, supporting each other through tough times. The teachers at school, with their profound lessons on justice and human rights, also helped her find faith in the legal profession. It wasn't easy, but every step on this learning path felt like a small victory, and Maya felt empowered by the encouragement of her friends and teachers. One day, after years of study, Maya participated in her first lawsuit. This case involved racial discrimination in the legal system, an issue that Maya had personally encountered throughout her life. It was a battle she had prepared for a long time, but as she entered the courtroom, she felt a lump in her throat, fear that couldn't be avoided. But immediately, she thought of her mother and her mother's lessons about resilience and fighting for justice. She couldn't let fear take over. She was determined to fight with all her strength, not only for herself but also for the victims abandoned by the system. Maya stood in the courtroom, looking at the witnesses and the defendant. She knew she wasn't just representing her client, but also part of a greater struggle against racism and injustice in society. She was not a violent person, but the power of words and truth was the strongest weapon she had. Every word Maya spoke in the courtroom was a call for justice, a declaration that no one, no matter who they were, had the right to disregard someone else's rights just because of their skin color. When the court's decision was announced, Maya felt a sense of fulfillment, not only because of the victory, but because she had truly achieved her dream. Justice had prevailed, and the victim had received the recognition they deserved. The emotions in her heart welled up. This was the moment Maya realized she had truly stepped onto the path her mother had hoped for her. Her mother had always believed that she would do it, that she would stand up for those treated unjustly. Maya felt proud, not only because of this lawsuit, but also because she had found her way, the path her mother had paved for her. Finally, when standing before the lawyer's office door, Maya felt a sense of pride, not only in her profession but also in the mission she carried. She was part of the change, a fighter who never stopped fighting for justice, and the faith her mother had placed in her still lived on in her heart. David sat in the living room of their small house, where the soft light from the hanging lamps illuminated old family photographs. Outside the window, the night had fallen, but David's mind was still preoccupied with thoughts of the past. His life had been full of trials, sleepless nights, and moments when it seemed everything was over. But now, looking at his daughter, a lawyer with unshakable determination, he felt an immeasurable sense of pride. From being a father who could only protect his daughter, he had learned that her strength and resilience were the things he could not stop being proud of. Maya was not just the daughter he had always protected, but now she was a fighter for justice, someone who was helping change society. Step by step, every action Maya took made him realize that, no matter how tough life may get, if there is enough faith and patience, justice will always prevail. Every time David visited Maya at her law office, he could sense the clear changes in his daughter. The first few times she stood in the courtroom, David's heart weighed heavily with worry. But now, as he watched Maya confidently face important lawsuits, he couldn't help but feel proud. She had not only learned how to fight for justice, but she had also learned how to stand firm against great challenges, where many others would falter. Each time he witnessed her stand in court, David couldn't help but feel moved, as if she was carrying on everything he and Angela had hoped for, a fairer future. Maya didn't stop. Even though she had won many cases, she knew that justice never came easily, and the battle ahead was still long. She became involved in significant lawsuits, those that directly affected the rights of minorities and those subjected to racial discrimination. Justice was sometimes imprisoned by unjust systems, and Maya would not allow herself to compromise. She knew that without people like her, justice would forever be out of reach for those without a voice. Maya didn't stop trying, even though the great challenges still lay ahead. She had to face skilled lawyers, powerful officials, and influential corporations. But what kept Maya going through it all was her belief in what was right. She always believed that, no matter how difficult, the truth would ultimately prevail. Then, one peaceful evening passed. Maya and David sat together in the warm atmosphere of the house. They looked back on the journey they had taken and planned for what was to come. Maya shared the upcoming cases she would be involved in. Each of her stories wasn't just about lawsuits, but about the change she hoped to bring to society. Maya shared her belief in creating a fairer environment where no one would have to suffer from racism or injustice. David looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with pride. He didn't say anything. He just quietly looked into Maya's bright eyes, where faith and determination always shone. He understood that the journey his family had started would never be in vain. Justice had been served, but the journey to change society was still long. Maya was not only his family's hope, but also the flame of change in society. She was living proof of the strength of fatherly love, of resilience that would never give up. The story ended with a powerful message. No matter how challenging and difficult life may be, love and determination can bring change, both for oneself and for society. Maya and David, in their journey, had proven that as long as one doesn't give up, justice and truth will always find their way.